And now we go on to our next talk, which is by Dr. Sujata Kar, who's the director of the Kar Clinic and Hospital Private Limited, Bhubaneswar. She's the honorary treasurer of ISAR. She's a managing committee member of the PCO Society India. And she has been the best graduate with 7 gold medals during her MBBS and MD. She's credited with the first IVF baby of Eastern Orissa and first laser assisted baby of Orissa. She also has a brand. She has a brand icon excellence award in 2018 for the best IVF center in Eastern Orissa. Parichay Award for Woman Achiever Orissa 2019 from the Honorary Governor of Orissa. Devi Award for Dynamism and Innovation for Chief Minister from the Chief Minister of Orissa. She has published 14 original publications related to PCOS and male fertility in PubMed. And she's written several chapters for books and contributed to the newsletter. And she is a reviewer for many international journals. She would be talking to us today on ovarian drilling, the current evidence. Sujata, please.
Thank you, Madhuri, for that lovely introduction. I'll just share my screen. Is it there?
Yeah.
Yes, well seen.
So thank you, Madhuri, and thank you to the PCOS Society, Dr. Duru and to you, Madhuri, for organizing such a high quality workshop and giving me an opportunity for speaking in this workshop. Thank you. So good evening, dear friends and delegates, all those who have logged in. My topic is laparoscopic ovarian drilling. What is the current evidence supporting it? Now, we know that for our infertile PCOS women, the first line treatment, which is lifestyle, is going to get many patients pregnant. The second line, which is the oral ovulogens, clomiphene citrate, letrozole, and the other adjuvants, is going to get many other women pregnant. Only those who will not be pregnant or will be resistant to the oral ovulogens do we have to consider the third line of treatment. The third line of treatment, once we have the CC resistant or oral ovulogen resistant PCOS woman with us, we have to take a decision whether to take gonadotrophin stimulation and IUI or to consider laparoscopic ovarian drilling, which is performed in an endeavor to induce ovulation and pregnancy in a CC resistant PCO. Now, you'll all also agree with me that the word or the term ovarian drilling generally generates amongst ART specialists a very vocal and often aggressive response and a debate, and majority of them not very supportive of ovarian drilling. So let me present the evidence to you, and at the end of the lecture you can decide. In 1935, it was Steen and Leventhal who introduced ovarian wedge resection, and Zonius in 1984 introduced laparoscopic ovarian drilling for the treatment of PCOS. And this was a fabulous review, extensive review published by Herman Tournai et al. Of Belgium that covered 3 decades of laparoscopic ovarian drilling. 28 years, included 284 studies, all randomized controlled trials and prospective studies, and they concluded that ovarian drilling is currently recommended as a successful and economic second line treatment for ovulation induction in the CC resistant PCOS. I will also be showing you more recent and contemporary evidence after 2013. So it doesn't seem to be going away, that's for sure. This technique is simple, it is a low complication, and it certainly is pretty effective. And it involves creation of multiple holes or openings through the ovarian capsule, usually laparoscopically, and you using a bipolar or a unipolar or even a laser energy source. The holes are usually 3 millimeters in diameter or with a depth of around 4 to 5 millimeters, which should always be made perpendicular to the ovarian surface. And typically we use a cutting current of 30 to 40 watts. and the number of holes range from 4 to 12. It is very important to maintain hemostasis and pelvic lavage. Usually when we are using a 2-port approach, usually what I like to do is keep a lot of fluid in the pouch of Douglas. And so, start doing the cauterization and intermittently keep dipping the ovary into the fluid. And after you finish, do a thorough lavage to clear off all the carbon and to cool down the ovary as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. I put up this slide to show you that the appearance certainly should not be like this. And even in the recent times, small studies have reported wedge resection instead of making multiple holes, because this likely could damage more of ovarian stroma, and then a microsurgical closure, very small groups. I'm not recommending this technique at all. All I'm saying is that people have in the very recent times also done wedge resection and reported a very high success. So the surgical technique of performing the ovarian drilling is the key. However, we still do not have the answer to the following questions. How many holes should we make? Should we take ovarian volume into consideration? What about follicle number per ovary or antral follicle count? Does it matter? Depending on that, should we decide on how many holes? Does ovarian stromal volume matter? Should we use calculated burn energy per ovary in joules rather than just make random holes? Is unilateral ovarian drilling enough? And what should be the best approach? Ovarian, laparoscopic, or a vaginal, or a hydrolap, or an ultrasound guided, etc., etc. We really don't have much answer. I'm just showing you a couple of very recent papers and evidence. This is a 2019 paper published recently, a randomized controlled trial that compares random holes, which means a standard technique of doing a ovarian drilling, against energy calculated per ovary. The energy calculated can usually be a fixed dose or a variable dose. If it's fixed dose, then 600 joules per ovary, or variable joule, then it is about based on the ovarian volume. There is a complicated way of calculating the energy. I don't want to go there. But then this study, which is pretty recent and had a large number of patients, I think close to 60 or 80 patients randomized to either arm, showed no difference between a standard technique and energy calculated per ovary. And then this was a Cochrane review 2019 that compared ultrasound guided vaginal needle drilling against versus laparoscopic ovarian drilling. So the ovarian laparoscopic ovarian drilling, the most important point being that it is a surgical procedure that needs general anesthesia and therefore carries all the risks of general anesthesia and laparoscopic surgery. Therefore, many people would rather not opt for it. So a vaginal technique, ultrasound guided, also has been being done for quite some time by quite a few centers, though not very commonly done. And this Cochrane review tells us that they do not have enough evidence to compare the two. And the results appear to be the same, although not very popular. Unilateral or bilateral, there are many studies that have reported a unilateral drilling may be enough, but then, as I said, we just don't have enough evidence. Now, mechanism of action of laparoscopic ovarian drilling also is not very clear. The bottom line is that we are destroying androgen producing stroma to a certain extent and thereby reducing the levels of circulating testosterones and LH and also intraovarian androgens, and therefore that likely modulates the pituitary ovarian axis and resumes a normal ovarian function. Various studies over the years have reported excellent ovulation rate and pregnancy rates varying from 50 to 90%, but then this level of variability is because of the heterogeneity of patient sample, I guess. And apart from ovulation and pregnancy rate, there are many other added benefits of ovarian drilling, which is cycles get regular largely. The internal endocrine milieu is improved. Even if they don't get pregnant spontaneously, that they get more sensitive to clomiphene citrate and gonadotropin. So they need lesser dose of gonadotropin, and the person who was resistant to clomiphene or letrozole might become responsive to clomiphene citrate. It reduces the dose and duration of ovarian stimulation, and reduces OHSs. And many studies have reported that the beneficial effects for some patients might last many years. The highest that has been reported is up to 9 years, wherein people have reported that therefore it's very cost effective form of treatment, because it also alleviates many symptoms. And there are some people who have also reported repeat LOD. I don't want to go there because many of our ART people might think that's like going beyond the normal, so let's not go there. But then those kind of studies also have been reported. Now we know that PCOS women are more likely to have early pregnancy loss even when they get pregnant. It's a known fact. We do not know the mechanism, whether laparoscopic ovarian drilling reduces this incidence of early pregnancy loss in PCOS women. That has been studied and a lot, but there have not been any clear-cut evidence whether it does or it doesn't. So as of now, we have to think that it does not. When we compare between gonadotrophin, because we have to choose between gonadotrophin IUI versus ovarian drilling, gonadotrophins certainly have a lot of disadvantages in the form of chances of high OHSs, chances of multiple pregnancy, high cost, chances of conversion to IVF, and therefore cycle cancellation for those who do not have facilities to do a convert to IVF. So gonadotrophins definitely have a couple of disadvantages compared to ovarian drilling. Now, ovarian drilling has many disadvantages. The primary, as I have already mentioned, being high risk for general anesthesia and laparoscopy, which itself involves high risk procedures. Other than that, the chances of adhesions and reduced ovarian reserve, which really has not been reported in a well-controlled or a big enough study. However, it appears these two are the major concerns: adhesions and reduced ovarian reserve, and the possibility that damaging the ovarian surface might lead to autoimmunity, increase ovarian antibodies that may reduce the ovarian reserve. So I have just two videos which I'll run quickly. This one was a woman who had actually undergone ovarian wedge resection in the year 2005 in a metro. And see, she was just married for 1 or 2 years, and had taken her up for diagnostic laparoscopy, and see how one of the ovaries is stuck to the anterior abdominal wall. The tubo-ovarian relationship is totally damaged. The other ovary is densely adherent to the lateral pelvic wall. And most importantly, I'll just show you, I'll run this quickly. The tube is densely, the distal 1/3 of the tube is so densely adherent to the ovarian surface that the fimbrial function or the tubo-ovarian function is so largely lost. And whatever technique you do to release these tubes, they are not going to be as effective as possible. So this was one patient. Another patient was really interesting. She didn't have too many good papers, reports and discharge sheet with her. But then she had reported that she had undergone a diagnostic laparoscopy along with laparoscopic ovarian drilling. And we had to take her up for a diagnostic and operative lab because there was a persistent mass, tubo-ovarian mass on the right side. And she was having persistent pain following laparoscopic ovarian drilling. And we were like really surprised. One side tube and ovary is normal. And the tube mass was stuck to the uterus. The tube or the ovary could not be seen separately. It formed a dense mass. I'll run it quickly. The gut was also adherent. And as I dissected the mass, a lot of pus started coming in. So I was kind of sure that maybe it's a ovarian abscess or something following a procedure, which had never been mentioned clearly in her discharge sheet as to what exactly she had undergone. Other than LOD done was written. And you can see that a gauze piece was left there. I mean, it has nothing to do with ovarian drilling, but the procedure that was done for her was ovarian drilling. And this was the complication that she landed up with. It is a gauzy bioma there. And patient had gone just for a diagnostic, taken up for only for laparoscopy, diagnostic laparoscopy, during which a ovarian drilling was done. I am thinking that there must have been some bleeding from the surface for which a gauze must have been used to press it. I simply cannot explain it, but this is what there was. And because there was no proper documentation, I cannot kind of further elaborate on as to what exactly was the cause. So let's put it this way, that so then if we have so many issues that are unsolved, which PCOS women needs LOD, that is ovarian drilling, that is what we need to figure out. And for what does she need? Whether she needs for ovulation induction, which is the commonest, or she needs for reducing complications of ovarian stimulation. We know that many studies have been published wherein people have done ovarian drilling before taking her up for IVF to reduce chances of OHSS, and or whether it is required for improving the symptoms of PCOS. So two things we need to sort out: which woman needs laparoscopic ovarian drilling, and that we need to sort out after deciding what does she need it for, ovarian, any one of these situations. And based on these two extensive reviews, one which I have already quoted earlier, the 3 decades from Zonai's laparoscopy. Another one was an excellent, review of many years published in 2015. Based on that, it would be fair to say that ovarian drilling seems to work best in women with low BMI or lean PCOS who are young, very young, have a high LH values. And we need to note that based on these papers that I've shown you, ovarian drilling would be predicted to result in poor reproductive outcome in this category of patients. If the BMI is more than 25, if she has a longer duration of infertility, more than 3 years, or if she's older in age, the basal LH is low, not very high, less than 10, marked biochemical hyperandrogenemia, and high AMH levels, which is more than 7.7, according to these studies that I have reported to you. There have also been a very recent paper that have been a very long-term analysis of laparoscopic ovarian drilling and long-term pregnancy rate. This was a study that ranged from for 10 years, 10-year follow-up, wherein they have reported that women, most of them underwent, had spontaneous pregnancy and had more than one pregnancy without needing any intervention or repeated laparoscopic ovarian drilling. And according to this recent 2009 review, the predictors of success were low BMI, infertility less than 3 years, age less than 35 years, and an antral follicle count of less than 50. And there we also have a very recent evidence wherein a Cochrane review of 2017 shows us of all these studies, a meta-analysis wherein laparoscopic ovarian drilling was done only for symptom relief, not for ovulation induction, wherein you're doing for cycle regularity, excessive androgens, acne, Hirschut, etc., etc. And they concluded that ovarian drilling is effective, although it's not more effective than the medical treatments. But then we know that medical treatments like oral contraceptive pills have to be taken for a pretty long time. They have pretty high, side effects. Even metformin has quite a bit of side effects. So ovarian drilling also can be used for symptom relief if the woman is not for ovulation induction. And my final point is that we know that AMH is related to ovarian reserve. We know that by now. We have also been have studied a lot about AMH and the link between AMH and PCOS, and we are fairly certain that AMH is one of the surrogate markers of PCOS. We are not there yet, but we will get there when more studies are accumulated. And we also know that ovarian drilling, post-ovarian drilling, there is a significant fall in androgens and free androgen index and LH. So what is the impact on AMH? So for that, I thought, let me show you a couple of very recent literature, which has studied level of AMH, which also is a marker of ovarian reserve. So impact of ovarian drilling on AMH and ovarian reserve. This was a large meta-analysis ranging for 16 years from 2000 to 2016. And they showed that almost every study that they saw had reported significant fall in AMH following laparoscopic ovarian drilling. Now the thing is that we are not sure whether this fall in AMH actually indicates fall in ovarian reserve. Because if it would indicate that, it would have a different conclusions to draw. But then we need much more studies. Lowering the AMH for a short period of time or immediate post ovarian drilling might be a good thing for ovarian stimulation for some category of patients. So this is where the studies are at this time. We are not sure whether it impacts ovarian reserve just by doing a ovarian drilling. And my concluding slide is the most recent widely cited evidence paper, which is the recent international evidence-based guidelines for the management of polycystic ovaries. We know that this was a huge document that was published, and it's a good reason for us to follow the evidence that has been shown in this document. And they have concluded that ovarian surgery, laparoscopic ovarian drilling, should definitely be a second-line therapy for women with PCOS who are clomiphene citrate resistant or oral ovulogen resistant, and they should be having no other infertility factor. However, all those who undergo ovarian drilling, they should be counseled about the cost, expertise that is required for doing ovarian drilling, equally compared to expertise that is required for ovulation induction, and they should be informed about the very low or small risk which is associated with ovarian reserve or loss of ovarian function. So to conclude, there is no doubt that laparoscopic ovarian drilling, whatever we say, is not going to go away. It's not gone away. It's not going to go away. And certainly a very small subset of PCOS women will benefit for ovarian drilling. And it is for us to choose those patients appropriately. The best markers currently are lean PCOS, young, lesser duration of infertility, high LH, and AMH between the ranges of 4 to 7. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sujata, for that excellent lecture and an overview of ovarian drilling. Though many of us still probably go in to do use gonadotrophins as a second line of treatment, but I think in India, where people do not afford gonadotrophins or they do not have the facility to come every day to take the gonadotrophins or take it themselves, I think probably it's a very good way to treat this group of patients.
And we also know how difficult it is to induce a monofollicular ovulation. Yes. How much expertise is required to decide on the dose and how long?
Yes. So there's one question for you, which says that usually PCOS ovaries have many follicles in the periphery. So how do you ensure during drilling that that stroma is distracted? Where do you exactly drill? On the prominent fluid-filled follicles or surface between the follicles?
You don't have to do on the prominent fluid-filled follicles. You just have to do couple, basically they are random. And you are, the purpose is to destroy the stroma. You have to go deep enough. So, but then it's not specifically required to do the fluid-filled ones.
Any more questions? Because there are 2 questions for Louis, but at least we'll take it at the end of the session because we'll deal with these questions now. If there are no questions, then probably we go to the next speaker and we have